Hi, I'm Brent Johnson, and today we're at Berry Christian Church in Kansas City. With me is Bill Klimas. He's Vice President and Artistic Director of the Reuter Organ Company. Bill, thanks for joining me here today. He's here to show us this instrument. This is a Reuter organ. When was it originally built, Bill?
Built in 1958.
1958, and it wasn't built for this church.
It was not. It was a studio organ at the University of Kansas.
Okay, just across the river in Lawrence, where Reuter's located, so it makes sense.
Right.
They got the local company to do it, and then how did it end up coming to this church?
It was moved here in 1986 by Charles McManus, a local organ builder and technician. It was moved here and set up, and has been serving here ever since. Reuter did a project in 2006. We did some additions to the organ, did a console upgrade, and just some mechanical upgrades.
The console has all been modernized.
Yeah.
Well, what sort of additions were made to the organ?
Well, the organ was very small scaled for two reasons. It was a product of its time, in the late 1950s, sort of a classic revival organ. Was kind of a reaction to organs from decades before that. It was small scales, very light, bright, clear sound. So the organ was a little bit small scale just from the time it was built. And also it was built for a very small space in a studio at the university. So they had to kind of hold it back for that reason. So this is a nice big space here. It's not huge, but it's pretty big, and the people sing here very well, and they like good music. So it was time for this organ to get a new voice. So actually, the old voice is still here. It's
just made some additions.
Yeah, we made swapped out some things and moved some things around.
We have the spec list there showing what we've added. So the first thing I see is the 8-foot principal.
8-foot principal.
So that's out here.
That is on the far side, and it shows in the facade over there.
Okay, and the grate's all on that side of the church, and the swelling choir over here.
The grate is on the right side, the swelling choir on the left.
So in 2006, when we did all these upgrades, then you added that principal.
Right.
So let's hear that 8-foot principal. A nice big warm broad sound.
Big warm sound, yeah. Big warm sound, fairly large scale for this space, not huge scale, but much bigger than the original. The goal here is to, as with all of our organs, is to make it a singer's organ. So ideally, you want to be able to lead a fairly good-sized congregation with just that one stop.
Okay. Well, and then you continued up the principal chorus there with the 4-foot octave.
Continuing up now, contained in that 8-foot tone is a good deal of the overtone series, a good deal of 4-foot tone, which is an octave higher than 8. So there in that very faint version of this, which is the 4-foot octave. Stop. So when you're playing the 8. Tone contained there, so it doesn't come on like a shot. Same thing goes for that, and also contained in that 8-foot principal tone is a little bit of 2-foot tone, and contained in the 4-foot octave is a whole bunch of faint 2-foot tone. Sounds are just
slowly brightens it up as it comes together.
They lock together, and they build on each other. So the goal is to make one nice cohesive sound. You can, with a good ear, you can pick the different pitches. You can pick the different stops out of there, especially when they're a little bit out of tune. But they're designed to all lock together to form a nice ensemble that you don't really notice that there's 3 different sounds going. It's all comes together as one.
Principal core sound. Well, then, in addition to that, then we have the stops that were already in the original organ. Those are the only additions you made to the grate. And the first thing we have is a 8-foot Borden
8-foot Borden.
down at the bottom.
We didn't do a whole lot to that.
Yeah, it's very nice.
It's very nice. It's a nice, light, gentle sound.
It's not big, but it's very clear.
If we tried to get more power out of that, it would not like it.
Yeah.
It would complain, but it's a nice sound in its own right. There's also another stop that didn't make the list. There's a error here. There's also a 4-foot harmonic flute, which is new. Which combines nicely with that gentle Borden. Also, that 4-foot harmonic flute, if you want to cheat a little bit, it can give you just a little bit of a unusual color, adding just to the 8-foot principal.
It just adds a little bit of.
You really can't hear it in there. It just adds just a little girth or just a little substance in a little higher pitch.
And then we have a 3-rank mixture. Was that original?
Three-rank mixture is original.
Okay.
Yes. There was a time in the 50s and early 60s where a lot of the Reuter organs had very small scale mixtures, which is different from the ones that sometimes we're known for, the larger scale mixtures that are loud. In modern our ears today find these sounds to be a little bit much. But this one was designed, of course, for a small space and at a good time. So this mixture is actually a very small scale, smaller than we would probably do now, but it was such a nice sound in this room. This room has a nice little bit of a life to it. And these people, they're not interested in hearing mixtures. They don't want to hear the mixture, they want to hear the ensemble. So this mixture blends nicely with the ensemble. It has just some, you see some breaks there. On the C sharp, all the way up. So it locks in nicely with the ensemble.
Just add some brightness to it.
Just very light and bright, yeah, yep. So the organ is led by the principal. It lays down the foundation. It's kind of a pyramid of tone, and then partway up that pyramid, the 4-foot grabs a hold of its tone, builds the pyramid higher. The 2-foot grabs its spot, builds it up higher, and the mixture just kind of fills out and sort of adds a crown to it. And the mixtures, well-designed mixtures will function differently as the compass changes. They start out and they add brilliance to the bottom of the keyboard and when the pitch is high, and as it breaks back, it adds a little bit of warmth and color to the middle area, and then in the upper area, when the pitch starts to getting lower, relatively, then it adds actually adds some 4-foot tone to the top.
Yeah, it keeps breaking back.
Yeah, it keeps breaking back.
Not screaming.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't scream. It just functions as sort of like a roll of twine that sort of bails the whole thing together.
Okay. We also have a set of chimes in that
Set of
division.
chimes.
Were those original?
Well, I doubt that they were original in the college.
Yeah, that's why.
There's not a lot of, well, there's a little bit of organ literature
But
built
more of
for
a
chimes.
church,
Yeah, there was.
Okay.
I would expect that Charles McManus installed those.
Okay, fair. We also have then a couple of stops that are borrowed from the choir.
Yep.
Nason gedeckt and a crumhorn. But let's go over to the choir then and listen to those stops. Starting with the Nason gedeckt is the
Nason gedeckt
8-foot.
is a narrow scaled wooden stop flute. It's not necessarily a small pipe. It's a kind of a rectangular box shape with a narrow on one side and wide on the
So
on the
if you
back
looked at
side.
it from the top, it's not going to be
If you looked
square.
at it's quite rectangular, and the mouth is on the narrow side.
So what does that impart to the sound?
Well,
when you put
it gives it a little bit of depth, and so say it emphasizes certain parts of the tone without letting it get heavy.
Okay.
So the fundamental is not heavy, but yet the overtones that suggest the fundamental are pretty strong. So.
So compared to like the Great Borden, this one's going to be a little brighter.
This one is, yeah, it's
More attack and a little more up.
exactly the being from the 1950s, it's got just a little bit of that articulation, maybe a little more than we would do now, but it's certainly a nice, clear sound.
Sure. It's not ridiculously loud. or
Right,
chiffy,
yeah.
It's just,
So they make a nice contrast to each other. They're not starkly different, and you can use them together, and if the temperature's just right, they'll be locked in tune and become one pretty nice sound. There was a kind of the nickname for the Nason flute around the Reuter shop was the popsicle flute, because that's what it looks like, with a foot on the bottom and a kind of a
skinny.
flat.
All right.
Yeah, it's a popsicle.
I can imagine that.
That's kind of what that looks like. Yeah.
Oh, and then there's a 4-foot flute. That can
4-foot koppel flute. This is also original. Koppel flute is a partially stopped pipe with a pointed cap, looks like a little dunce cap on top of the pipe. It is similar in some ways to a Borden. You can actually compare. It's a metal pipe, so it's round.
Okay.
One of the characteristics that makes the Nason flute what it is that it's made out of wood. The other characteristic is that it's not round.
Okay.
So those two things come together to make it to contrast with the Borden. The koppel flute is again round metal with a pointed cap, but it's partially open. It's pointed, but it has an opening at the top.
The cap is open.
The cap is open. So these two sounds will resemble each other if I play that the Borden and the koppel flute sort of one after another.
Yeah, they're remarkably similar.
They're remarkably similar, yeah. So on an organ like this, with all these nice couplers, there are some little things that you can do, especially if both divisions happen to have tremolos, which these do. And if we can use the choir to grade 16, so that they're both actually going to be functioning as 8-foot flutes. So they're both, you got two similar sounds together, coming from opposite sides of the room, and both with tremolos. Now, it's impossible to align those tremolos.
Right.
So they're out of phase with each other. So here you have these two shimmering flutes sort of embracing each other as they play. You can, if you don't like how they combine, turn one tremolo off and turn it back on, and then you'll get it. It'll change the. Now, if you really will jump ahead here, you can pull the roar flute on from the swell and add that into the mix too. Great, and just. Can't tell that there's two or
There's
three
multiple
pipes.
sides.
Yeah, it's just.
Well, and we've seen other builders recently have done things like an all flute stop that couple everything together in that same method. But you can do it here with, 16 and 4-foot couplers or whatever to
Yep.
put
Yeah, you
everything
can.
into unison. But yeah, that works remarkably well. blending together. And I assume if it was a hot summer day and maybe the sun was shining on one side, you could get a little bit of Celeste.
That's a good way
trouble
to mask temperature issues, yeah.
so it was intentional. Very good. Well, then we also have some strings in that division.
There's a set of air sailors here. Very nice sound on its own. And then the matching stop to that, which is tuned slightly sharp. Hear this one again. Slightly stronger. The unison stop is slightly stronger, but then they'll combine to create a undulating effect.
Very nice, very gentle, but warm and bright at the same time.
Yep.
And then we have a Gems horn, which
4-foot Gems horn.
I'd be happy to have you talk about. There's been some discussion on some of these videos about the fact that on so many American organs, the Gems horn is the string that's sometimes the only string in a division, and it's not really a string stop. We call it that just out of habit.
It's kind of neither fish nor fowl, but a nice thing in its own right.
Let's hear this one.
This one, okay, let's hear it a minute. Combine that with these two as your foundation, the Nason-Gedeckt and the Air Sailor.
Yeah, in that combination, it's almost like a small principal.
That's exactly how it functions in this division.
It's not really trying to be a string.
No, it's not. But you can't call it a principal because if you look at it, you think, well, that's not a principal. But that's how it functions.
Okay.
And you've got this copper flute as your flute color, which is a nice fuller, darker sound. But the Gems horn is light and bright, and it actually makes a very good tuning stop.
Oh, really?
When you tune an organ, you want to have a stop that is that puts out a nice, pretty good selection of overtones that you can use to lock in other pipes to that pitch. It's difficult to tune to a flute because the overtone series is very limited, and it doesn't put out a nice clear pitch. I mean, you can tell when a flute's out of tune, but you can't tune to it.
Yeah, okay.
So that Gems horn makes a really nice tuning stop.
Well, and then to sort of complete that chorus, we have an Italian principal.
Italian principal. I'm not sure what's Italian about it, but it was a good name in 1958. So you actually these are original pipes to the organ. Very gentle. These were voiced again and designed for a small studio. We decided when we did the tonal upgrade in 2006 that we were not going to push those. They're capable of a little bit more power, but that ensemble in the choir is so gentle that it would call attention to itself. Again, the idea is to get the sounds to lock together. So if you taken as a whole, if you build your ensemble, here's your 8-foot, and your 4-foot Gems horn / principal-esque. Your 2-foot principal.
Yeah, it builds and gets, it's just like the grade, it gets brighter,
It's
but
a
you don't
very
really...
gentle it's like an echo to the great.
Yeah, just another little principal chorus.
Yeah.
And then you can even top it off. We have one more.
Top it off with 1/3 largo, which is plays a fifth above the unison. So the principal plays 2 foot middle C, and this will play a tempered version of the G above that. So they combine to make a unison in a pure fifth. So you add that to the ensemble.
It adds a lot of brightness.
Yeah,
and
it does.
it's
It
a
does.
little more pointed.
It does. And it's very gentle. It's actually a small flute scale.
Oh.
It's not a narrow principal scale, so it doesn't have a lot of bite to it.
Yeah, but it's definitely present.
Yeah, it's very present. Yep. And it also works nicely with the flutes. If you put on your even without the
Would that work as a solo voice? Maybe with the tremolo
it
on
could,
there,
sure,
if you
sure.
accompany with the swells.
color that in any way that you want. You can actually use most of the choir division as a solo. In a good organ, pretty much anything is a solo.
Well, that's true. Some of them, but the colors really, even though it's not a big, loud division there, the colors really cut through.
They
They're
cut,
bright.
yeah. They're very
Present in the
light
room.
and bright, and they carry nicely in this room likes music.
Yeah.
So
And all of that was original in the 1958
This is
organ.
all-
so that's
yes, this
the way
is
it was
all
played.
original.
Okay. Well, we also have 2 reeds in there. I
Two
assume
reeds,
they're different. Yeah. Tell me about these reeds.
Well, you have an 8-foot crumb horn from 1958. Their crumb horn was a medieval instrument, and I never heard a, well, I've heard reproductions, and none of us have heard a real one played live, but it's a half-length reed, and it has the tone of a very buzzy clarinet. As a solo, you can combine it with other things. You can put the Erzähler on if you want to just give it just a little more weight. Gesang-gedeckt. Go in, add the 4-foot copple flute. It's starting to sound like a clarinet
Yeah,
now,
definitely.
because these other sounds come up around the buzz, and the buzz just kind of melts into the ensemble. You can even add that to the great principal. Bigger and bigger. The clarinet gets bigger and bigger the more
This more you
things
put in
add
with
to
it.
it.
So
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And then we also have a 4-foot reed.
4-foot reed, a Rorschach.
Rorschach.
This was sort of a fad at the time, in the 50s and into the 1960s. The 4-foot Rorschach is a wonderful sound. It's maybe not what we would put on an organ today, but how can you throw out a nice little sound like this? So you add that to the crumb horn. Almost sounds like a harpsichord.
Almost. It's a much more medieval Renaissance
Yes.
sort of sound.
And they do make a nice little ensemble. You put it with the rest of the chorus. It's a nice little ensemble.
Piece of choir there.
Yeah.
All right. I
Yep.
like it. And then we have a borrowed trumpet from the swell.
Borrowed trumpet from the
Let's
swell.
go over and look at the swell. And let's
Okay.
see how to use that as a jumping off
All
point.
right.
And we did make some additions in 2006 to the swell,
Mm-hmm.
I know. But we'll start with the 8-foot roar flute at the bottom there.
8-foot roar flute. is a round metal pipe, stop flute, similar to the Borden. The main difference is on the flat top cap, there is a little chimney that comes off. So there's a small tuned vent on top of the cap. And those little chimneys are proportional to the length of the pipe. So they emphasize some of the harmonics.
Okay.
So there was a time when the Reuter people were trying new things and just experimenting with different sounds, that they would actually put a small tuning slide on that chimney so they could sort of dial in the different harmonics. Yeah, and it's the tierce harmonic that they were trying to actually quite successfully on some of the pipes, on some of the stops. If the room and the rest of the installation was favorable to that tone, that would really make a nice little thing. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, and then from there we have Viol da Gamba.
We have Viol da Gamba. This is original. Now, this being a studio organ in the 1950s, it didn't have a Celeste. There was a space, cost, and maybe they just didn't want any sweet, sugary sounds getting into their Baroque literature at the time. So we added a Celeste, which is going to behave similarly to the Erzähler. So you hear the unison in the new Celeste.
Yeah, that works really well.
It does.
A nice addition there. So
Yeah, and the really nice thing about this is that the two stops are several feet away from each other, so they don't interact.
it's actually important when you have Celeste.
It is.
What if they're too close? Then
If
you
they're
don't
too
get a
close,
good-
then they start to draw, and the stronger one will try to pull the weaker one to its
you
pitch.
don't get that nice
Yeah,
undulation.
yeah, and you'll get an undulation, but it'll be very deep and difficult to control. So if they're farther apart, they can't pull each
I
other.
guess that makes it. If you added it, there wasn't space on the chest.
Right,
So you
exactly.
had to
That was
add
probably
some on the
it's
chest.
probably a good thing. Yeah, yeah. The Erzählers on the choir are a little bit close together. It does help to turn the mouths of the pipes away from each other. That does help. But since this is an addition that the organ wasn't built with, we were able to put it further away and also contour it in the opposite direction so that when they really start pulling is in the treble. And those
They're on opposite ends of the-
those pipes are several feet
Okay,
apart.
that's well done then. And then we go up to a 4-foot principal.
Four-foot principal, original to the organ.
Okay.
On the swell, there is no 8-foot principal, but you do have a lot of the elements of that sound if you were to pull out the Reuter flute and Viol da Gamba together as your foundation. The Reuter flute will give you a little bit of weight, and the Viol da Gamba will give you some harmonics. So it's a sort of a quasi-principal tone, which it gives the 4-foot principal something to build upon.
Okay, yeah, that works. I hear a lot of that 1958 shift though.
Yep,
attacking those,
yeah, it's there.
principal pipes. That was so preferred. And then we have a 4-foot flute.
4-foot nocturne. This is an open metal flute, which has a sort of a decorated sine wave sort of tone to it.
Okay.
Now, that stop, it can be used as an echo to the great 4-foot harmonic flute, because they are very similar in the lower range. Now, the great harmonic flute, we didn't touch on that earlier, but it goes to a double length pipe at middle C. So it's a double length pipe that's overblowing. So the nocturne does not go double length. So it keeps a little bit darker tone, but you put them on together. You have stereo open flutes. And if you want to really mix things up, put your tremolos on.
It fills the room with those two
It
little
just
flutes.
does, yeah,
It's
those two
amazing.
stops together. The overlength, or the double length of the harmonic flute, a double length pipe really has a lot of carrying power. You can actually hear that sound. If you were to stand outside in the back and play a pretty good sized, pretty full ensemble, and if you have that harmonic flute on, the further you get from the organ and the rest of the pipes, the more you'll notice that harmonic flute carrying.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It just seems to throw a little further than the other stops.
All right.
Yep.
And then where do we go from there after the 4-foot?
Well, let's see. We've got a Nizard, a 2 2/3.
And that was added.
This was added. There was not a Nizard or tierce in the original organ, I imagine due to space. So again, this functions as the Larigo, only an octave lower. So build your. So if you were to listen carefully, you probably can't hear it down here so much. Maybe you might be able to hear it out in the room, and you can certainly hear it in the chamber next to the pipes. The roar flute, that's a pretty good note. You can hear that pretty well here. If you listen carefully, that pitch is contained in there at a pretty strong level. So the roar flute contains the 4, the 2 2/3, and also the tierce, which plays a third, a major third, 2 octaves higher, 2.5 octaves higher. So in that, and back when they were tuning the chimneys on the roar flutes, they would get the tierce in tune, and then they would tweak that little chimney to tune to the tierce. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely all of those colors come
All
together.
those colors,
really well.
all those colors are there because, or they lock together because all of those tones are contained in that roar flute. So it builds in a similar manner to the way that great principal chorus builds.
Right, just with flute tone.
Just flute tone, yeah.
And then we also have a mixture in there.
There's a mixture that is original to the organ, 3 rank. This one's a little bit bigger scale than the great. Of course, being behind the shutters, it needs just a little bit more power to get out, and product of its time, of course. But it's a nice little addition to the ensemble. This mixture is voiced a little bit differently from the great mixture. It's a little bit lower pitched to begin with, and the breaks are in a little bit different places. But this one is voiced with a little bit more of a quint. So since there's no 2-foot principal tone in the swell, there's a 2-foot flute, but the 2-foot principal tone. So the 2-foot line and the 2 2/3 line in that swell mixture are emphasized slightly across the middle of the keyboard, just to add those colors and give it a contrast and just give it so it adds to the grate instead of trying to duplicate it exactly.
Right. So with just those 3 ranks, we just fill in some of the
Exactly.
blanks that aren't
Yep.
there. All right. And then I assume that couples down to the grate.
It does,
It
yep.
rides right on top of the
Yep,
the
it
grate.
does. If you were to play the grate, let's start with a smaller grate ensemble, just the 8/4 principles. Turn the swell on and off, you'll be able to hear that. On this side of the building, it just adds...
Yeah, it just
adds-
fills in the ensemble that's already there.
You have Papa Bear and Mama Bear over here, and then of course you can then bring the grate up. Then the grate gets ahead of the swell, but the swell has a secret weapon, has a trumpet here.
All right, the
so
trumpet.
the swell can catch back up.
So I want to hear that trumpet by itself,
Okay.
because that's a bright
It is.
big trumpet there.
It is.
Not a big scale trumpet.
Not a big
but
scale.
Bright and
It's
it
very
sticks out
bright.
on
It's
the inside.
a 1958 trumpet.
Okay. Let's hear how that sounds with just the swell chorus.
Sure. Let's build our chorus.
Okay, so it definitely caps that
It
ensemble.
really
but
does. It really caps the whole organ nicely.
The fact that you can use it separately as a solo in the choir, you could accompany then on a
Exactly.
second
You
swell stops or
can
even the
play.
grand stops.
You can play yourself a nice little wedding tune just with everything just out of the swell box. So.
It works well. All right, so that's everything in the swell there. That trumpet's also available at 4 foot. So
It is, yep.
borrow it
Just
up
adds a little more fire.
And then we have most of the pedal is borrowed, but we do have an independent Spitz principal at 8 foot.
There is a Spitz principal at 8 foot,
That's it.
and that is in the facade here. That is original. If you contrast that to the great principal on the other side.
Quite as big, but the Spitz
No.
principal's a little narrower.
Right, a
scale.
little narrower, has a little more, more of a bite to it.
Well, and like I said, everything else is borrowed. We get the Borden, which comes from the grate.
Comes from the grate,
16 foot,
yep.
That's our main. And then the Nason Gedeck.
Nason Gedeck.
is actually available.
So these pipes actually have a nice sound to them. I don't know if you'd be able to hear it going down. Not a lot of weight there,
No,
but
it's
it's
really
a,
soft.
but it's again, we are kind of under it, so it's a lot of it's going over our head.
Well, and I hear a lot of the fifth, the
Yep,
quince sound
yep,
in that too,
yep.
really helping. So
Yep.
if you, I imagine if you blend that with the Borden, you would then get.
Yep. It lends its own fifth.
That's true. So we're getting a lot of
So-
it, but it definitely makes it a big.
Yeah, as you go down, they actually, us being further from that gives that more fundamental.
Yeah, it's working.
Yep.
And then after the Spitz principle, then we borrow the Borden at 8 foot, and then the 4 foot octave that's just an extension of the Spitz flute, I
Yes.
assume? Okay, that goes on, and then the nocturne, and then we have a 2 foot, which is the extension. So
2 foot extension, yes. One thing we did not look at though is the crumhorn extension.
crumhorn goes to 6.
So that actually plays on the grate also. So
So it does actually go all the way.
bass clarinet, this is the real deal.
Wow. Okay.
That
I
is
didn't
quite a
expect that.
pipe. When you're right next to it, you'd think there's a 16-foot flute on with it.
Wow,
It's
okay.
really nice, yeah.
And then the trumpet, let's see,
This was
the 16 was added.
Yeah,
So that
16
was
was
just
added, yes.
an extension to
And unfortunately, there's not room in the swell box for it. So those are full-length pipes going all the way to 16 feet.
But they're
so
outside the swell
They're
box.
outside. They're actually over on the grate side.
Okay.
So if we were to play, here's, we'll just play right here. So we'll run it out of the swell and into the other side.
There is a difference there, but you don't have that 16 on the swell, so you're not going to run into
Right,
that on
yeah,
the manual. And
right.
that's really the bottom is where you really want to hear
Exactly,
the reeds anyway.
exactly.
So,
And that 16-foot crumb horn does add a nice little bit of weight without, well, it's just some little bit of gravity without thickening to the great chorus. If you combine that with the Nason-Gedeck that also plays.
I'm surprised I realized those do actually go all the way down to
Yeah,
16. The
yeah,
Nizam
they
and
do.
The chrome horn. So that's they're
Yeah.
good. That makes up for having no real 16 in
There
the
is
grades.
not a lot of
But you can
16-foot power in this
borrow,
organ.
which was typical
That
of
is, again,
the
there's
time.
two reasons for that. One is the time it was built, and the other is that it was built for a small space.
Yeah, so you don't need a lot. But in here, it works well just to have those. coupled in.
This room likes music, so I wouldn't call that a shortcoming of the organ. It's a characteristic of the organ, and the room helps it. Room sympathetic.
And then with the Borshama in the choir is available at the top of the pedal
Exactly.
as a solo voice.
For a little choral prelude sounds.
And we have couplers galore, everything you could ever need, so you can move things around wherever you want. It's handy to have. And then, of course, in the renovation, you also added MIDI. I assume
Yes.
that came in 2006, so we have MIDI stops on every division as well. Well, your colleague Ron Krebs is here, and he's going to play the organ
Okay.
for us a little bit, so we can
Good.
hear what this thing can do.
Let's wish him well.
To get into the organ, we go through this door, which takes us to the hallway behind the sanctuary. There are stairs that lead up to the second floor. And we come out right at the top of the great chamber. This is looking inside the grate. You see the pedal pipes to our left there. And then behind us there is the 16-foot trumpet. That's actually the swell trumpet, but it's housed in here. And then we see the great pipes here. Borden and flute harmonique and principals and the mixture. Just another look at the trumpet. Then on the end of the chest is the 16-foot crumb horn, mitered over so it fits in the angled ceiling here. Some of the harmonic flutes there. And then here's a peek underneath the great chest. This is a Reuter tremolo. It spins and swings that weight around, which causes the regulator lid to oscillate and sets up a vibration in the pipes. To get into the choir and swell, we just continue down the same hallway to the other side of the church. And there's a door here, and we are in the swell. There's the 8-foot strings. Then the chest here for most of the organ. There's the added stops there on the back. And the chimes. Once we're up on the chest, we can see the mixture, and then here's the 8-foot trumpet. And the expression shades at the front of the chest. And we're looking down onto the roar flute and the string. And out through the facade, you can see into the church. There's some of the added trebles for the mutations. And this is the additional chest here in the back. The choir is right next door, and to get into it, you have to move this panel, which Bill is doing for us here, so we can take a look inside. It allows a tight little opening where we can look in and see the choir. There's the crumhorn and the nason flute, Erzähler and Erzähler Celeste. There's our roar shalmai on the front. You can see the coppa flute back against the shades there. A little tuning chair for tuning in this tight chamber. There's some of the added trebles up there.
so much for talking about and demonstrating this 1958 Reuter organ. We've had a great time here on this side of the state in Kansas visiting the Reuter shop and hearing others of your instruments. So I hope it's been informative and interesting. We visited a couple of other Reuter organs, including your Opus 1, which is still playing in Mattoon, Illinois. If you want to watch that video, there's a link up there. We've also been over to the cathedral in Springfield, Illinois, where a new instrument was installed. So it's just been a lot of fun learning a lot about your company and the instruments you build. If you'd like to learn more about the Reuter Organ Company, there's links down in the description. And what's the company website?
It's reuterorgan.com.
Reuterorgan.com is a great place to learn more about them. You can contact them there. For streaming classical organ music 24 hours a day, remember you can find us on our 3 stations, organlive.com, Positively Baroque, and The Organ Experience. If you'd like to help us make more videos, you can support us by going to organ.media and clicking on support. There's even a special video sponsorship level where you can help sponsor one of these videos. If you like this video, please click the thumbs up button and subscribe for future videos. I'm Brent Johnson. I'll talk to you next time.